So, good morning. There isn't any better place to be this Sunday morning when it's raining outside than here. And so I want to welcome you all. Please take a seat. My name is Anat Saragusti. I will moderate this panel. Originally, I'm here for the Abraham Initiative. I'm on the board of this organization, but since I was here, Yael asked me to moderate the panel. I'm glad to do that. The topic, as I told you, is the Israeli election round 2. It's a very, very broad topic, and we will try to narrow it down. Let me introduce the panelists for this morning. On your left is Ambassador Alon Pinkas, former Consul General of Israel in New York. He also served as a Chief of Staff to former Foreign Minister David Levy and Shlomo Ben-Ami, and Foreign Policy Advisor to Shimon Peres and Ehud Barak. Pinkas was a member of the Israeli delegation to the Israeli-Syria peace talks in 2000 and has participated in Israeli-Palestinian negotiations and the joint US-Israel Strategic Policy Planning Group. Ambassador Pinkas holds a BA in political science from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and an MA in government and politics from the Georgetown University. I encourage you to follow him on Twitter. He's very funny. Member of Knesset, Radir Kamal Mrech, congratulations for your elections. Is a member of the Blue and White Party and the first Druze woman, applause, to serve in the Knesset. Before entering politics, Kamal Mrech was a journalist hosting a daily newscast in Arabic for the Israeli Broadcasting Corporation. In 2017, she made history as the first non-Jewish woman to anchor a primetime Hebrew newscast in Israel. This is really something very big in Israel. Not trivial at all. Wow. Oh, you gained so many points now. Go Nationals, yeah? Well, I don't know about that. They're what? Oh, that's true. Sorry, that's true. I wish I knew the rules. Never mind. And Amir Tibon is the award-winning Israeli journalist who is currently the Washington correspondent for Haaretz. I'm sure you all read him daily. His writing on Israel and the region has appeared in leading US publications, including The Atlantic, Foreign Affairs, Politico magazine, Politico, interesting, The New Yorker, Tablet, and others. His first book, a biography of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, was published in July 2017. He has reported in the past from conflict zones in Syria, Ukraine, and southern Eastern Europe. Welcome. On Wednesday evening, Benny Gantz, I'm sure you all heard this name and managed to practice it, a new player in the Israeli political scene, got the key to try to form a government. In the best case scenario, he will need a majority out of the 120 members of Knesset, meaning at least 61 votes. I will not get into the political system in Israel. It's a little bit complicated, not as here. If he fails, we may face another round of elections. It's in the air. Gantz already called all heads of lists to schedule meetings, and I think he's meeting them as we speak. The political situation in Israel is not clear, and actually we are divided between two major camps. The right-wing camp led by Netanyahu and includes all the right-wing parties and the Haredi, Ashkenazi and Mizrahi, and the center-left camp led by Benny Gantz. The big enigma is Avigdor Lieberman, who doesn't have a clear ideology, and nobody but him knows what he wants or what his price is. He can be a game changer, the swing player. I will start by introducing some political fun facts to generate our discussion. In our social and political discourse in Israel, we have 4 major cleavages. The first is between Jews and Arabs, which reflect the tension between the Jewish and the democratic state and values, and of course the nation-state law declaring that the state of Israel is a Jewish state and practically making all non-Jews citizens second class is an excellent way to strengthen the Jewish component over the democratic one. The second cleavage is between the religious and the secular. This reflects the tension between religion and the state. Third is between left and right, or between the supporters of Greater Israel and those who support a two-state solution. And fourth is, I cannot avoid it, the gender gap. Now, if we try to analyze the results of the last election, maybe the two last rounds of elections, there are 15 Arab and Druze members in the current Knesset, which is a little bit more than 10%, where their share in the society is 20%. The majority of them are in the joint Arab list, or the joint list. One is here with us today, Qadir. That reflects the rise of the percentage of the Arabs who voted in the second round. The turnout was 60%. This is higher than it was. It was 50%. And practically the Arab vote was a real game changer in the last political round elections in Israel. The religious cleavage is reflected by the fact that more than 20% of the members of Knesset are religious, which in Israel means Orthodox. Why is that a problem to the liberal camp? A, because their authority for making decisions is God, through the rabbis and not necessarily the law or the state. In that case, the weight of the rabbinical institution is higher than its actual share in the society. And second, because traditionally those parties have always been in the coalition, so nobody dare ignoring them, and therefore their votes are more powerful than others. The ultra-Orthodox party don't grant access to women participating in the political process other than vote. Women cannot run for office or be elected in those parties. The divide between left and right is not very clear, and the majority of the Israelis are somewhere in the middle. They do support the two-state solution, but not now. The only ones that have a strong stand about those issues are the extreme right, who advocate for annexation, or the peace camp that advocate for an agreed-upon two-state solution. In terms of the gender gap, in the Knesset there is a decrease, and we have a little over 20% women. Most of them are in the center-left camp. Almost all of them are not high in their lists. Half of the Knesset members, 49, are new. This is their first term, and they are not familiar with the system yet. And one last fact, 10% are ex-generals. They spent most of their professional years in uniforms, in a very hierarchical organization, give or receive orders. Most of them never took a sick child to the doctor, or went to the grocery store to buy milk, or even went on a public transportation. Let's say that the context that both last elections campaign were divisive, populists, had tons of incitement speak and racism, all reflected very powerfully in the social media, but also in the mainstream institutional media. And we all desperately need to heal. I guess you too, as a society. So Radir, I'll start with you. You play the two fields. And you can give a perspective from both sides about the media and the incitement of the media. So can you elaborate on that?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Anna, thank you. Thank you, J Street, for inviting me today. It's my honor to be here today with you. I'm here as a politician, but also as a former anchor woman, as a former broadcaster. I worked in IBA, in Israeli Broadcasting Authority. I worked in IPBC, in Israeli Public Broadcasting Corporation. And I understand the powerful connection between media and politics. And this is bilateral connection. It means media affects politics and politics affect media. And it's especially true in Israel in this complicated democracy with the complicated security situation. People are so stressed. People are connected 24/7 to news. We, the simple citizen, get pushed every 2 minutes and want to know what is happening in the northern and in the southern border because there are always enemies. So this connection is so strong. When we are talking about this connection, in general, we must define communication. So we have the traditional, the classic communication, the radio station, TV outlets, the newspapers, and we have the new media with all the social media. And Benjamin Netanyahu understood that. He studied communication. He studied how to stand in front of a camera, how to give a speech. And he understood two things. He understood that the power of the traditional media will be declined. And he understood that there is a new actor in this field, the social media. And he knew that he could control it with short messages, without any mediator. He don't need to go to see which editor is going to be hired or to talk to journalists. He could manage this field much more easily. He will be in control. So he decided to abandon the classic media. He didn't give even an interview for 3 years to a major or a news outlet in Israel. He decided to go with all the power, to put all the pressure on the new media, and he started his campaign, actually 2 campaigns last year. He worked with young people, even his new media advisor, 27 years old, Topaz. He knew that all the young people are there. It is something that he could control. It is something that will strengthen his base. And he started to work there. And we saw campaign full of racism. He attacked Arab minority, but actually everybody or person or office stood in front of his way in order to win the election, even though the general attorney, the police, everybody. And sometimes it took me, not just as a politician now, or even as a citizen or a minority, sometimes it took me 2 minutes to understand or to believe that these are statements that I am hearing from my prime minister. He blamed that Arab community or Arab minority is going to steal the election even before we had election. He wanted to legislate a law in order to put cameras in the polling station, and we know that the main purpose was just to create chaos and in order to reduce the percentage of people who go out and vote. And he said that Arab are going or want to destroy Israel, all of us, women, men, and children. And you know, it took me minutes to understand what I am hearing. And the fact that he abandoned the media, the classic media, and went with all the power to new media, for me it was a failure. You know, as a prime minister, he wants to be considered as Mr. Media, Mr. Charisma, Mr. Communication, Mr. Security, and you cannot run away from the hard questions. You cannot abandon the classic media. You mustn't do that because you have responsibility.
Well, he succeeded very well. I mean, he talks above the journalists' heads, and he succeeds.
Yes, but in his position, there is a responsibility for your citizens. You have to give answers and to explain what is going on in your country. And in my party, we understood or we appreciated the power of both fields, the classic media and the new media. We opened pages and started from zero. So in general, I can tell you that this connection is very strong. I visited 2 days ago a museum here in Washington, and it is amazing to see this power connection and how it could shape not just politics, it even could shape wars. And I can tell you, when I was 12 years ago, I called a manager of local media outlet in my village, and I told them I want to volunteer, I want to work here, because I knew since very young age the power of these small screens of shaping reality. As an anchor woman, I can tell you that the fact that you decide which items are going to be tonight broadcasted, which item is going to be the open item, who you are going to interview, in which way, how long, which questions you are going to ask. This is huge power. You decide what is important and what is not, and how it is important. In which way? And we saw what happened in the Middle East, or the new Middle East, after the Arab Spring. Even Syria, this dictatorship and closed country, was exposed to the whole world. Even in the new media era, any simple citizen with a simple smartphone could send photos and transmit it to the whole world with no any mediator, with no any editor or journalist, and expose the reality as is from his eyes in an objective way. So it's very important.
This maybe is increasing democracy. Everybody could do that. I mean, there is equality among all the people.
Yes, so when we go back to the classic media, it means that the credibility should be so high, especially in the new era media, when any citizen could be a journalist.
But let me ask you something. The rhetoric in these social media, especially coming from the Prime Minister's office, is very insightful and racist. How do you think the mainstream media should react to that? Because he speaks above their heads. He doesn't care about them. And he even established his own studios in the former elections. So how do you think, coming from the media, from the mainstream media, how do you think the media should react to that? I mean, what did they do wrong?
I think, first of all, that the media, and especially in Israel, the media must keep going or must act as the democracy's watchdog. And the fact that in the classic media, there are professional people, that this is their job, if I'm talking about editors or journalists, to provide news in an objective way. But although we know that there is no any objective or pure or 100% objective way, any media outlet is under pressure, or there are always external pressures, even though political pressure. We know why Al Jazeera propaganda looks that way and why Fox News in that way. So there is no 100% objective media outlet. But you must keep your credibility, your loyalty to your audience. It doesn't matter to which pressure you have put in.
Alon, can you elaborate on that, especially in the viewpoint of the Israeli media covering the Arab minority in Israel? And from what I see, the journalist or the host of the TV and radio shows didn't push back to the politician incitement. I mean, how would they have, maybe should have, act differently in that context? To put the flames down. And by the way, this is live stream in Facebook of J Street and YouTube. Please, Alon.
Thank you. I'm not an expert on the media. No, on the Arab media and why they didn't.
I'm talking about the Hebrew media.
No, yeah. Well, why the Hebrew media or the Hebrew language media or the Israeli media, the Jewish Israeli media, did not push back. And look, it has to do with the variety of things. They're impoverished. Newspapers close, and television stations are owned by private, sometimes politically motivated, as is the case in this country to a degree. And there's also a Stockholm syndrome relationship between the Israeli media and Mr. Netanyahu. I happen to somewhat disagree with this enchantment that people have with his media skills. For someone who's supposedly so versed, so skillful, and so experienced and seasoned in media, sure as hell not a lot of people believe anything he says. Not in Israel, not in the world. And his magical media capabilities work on his base, much like Trump's. But he preceded Trump in that respect. What he also managed to do is to create a very charged, somewhat racist, somewhat insightful with a C, not with an S, lest someone didn't understand where I'm coming from. A somewhat insightful discourse in Israel, and he's been doing it for 10 years. Now, we're all lamenting the media treatment of him and his onslaught on the media, but let's remember two things. His first term from 96 to 99 was traumatic for him in terms of how the media treated him. He blamed the media for essentially losing the 1999 election to Ehud Barak, tomorrow night's speaker. And he believed to a large extent that it's part of a grand scheme of the old elites, the legal elite, the academic elite that discriminated against his father, the Ashkenazi laborite elite, and of course the media. And he learned his lesson, and he nurtured a relationship with one Sheldon Adelson, who then gave him the grandest of political gifts, his own newspaper. And then he convinced some people to buy a stake in what was then Channel 10, Ronald Lauder, etc. And then he convinced people to buy into Channel 2. And then he went into this tug of war with Yediot Ahronot, the highest circulation daily, which is now part of the legal indictment that he may be facing. And last night's news in Israel was all about the release of tapes, him talking to the publisher of Yediot Ahronot. Now, but that's a background. Now, in 30 seconds or less, I'll try and answer your question. His entire narrative has been anti-Arab, okay? And the media buys into that. Now, on the other hand, there's more and more Arab-speaking or Arab producers and journalists.
So there are like two contradicting trends.
Absolutely two contradicting trends. Now, the media understands this because the media understands his point of view, because the media is part of the problem here. I mean, no offense to anyone. The media has basically ignored the 20% Arab population since 1948. Let's face it. And always bought into this, well, they should be so lucky to live in Israel and not in Syria. Let's see them go to Iraq. Look what's going on in Lebanon. You're free to go to Jordan. They're killing journalists in Turkey, and what have you. So shut up and be thankful that you're living here. That was the general idea that politicians drove and the media happily expressed. So you're talking about a pushback. I'll tell you what. I think for the first time, at least in my memory, and again, I'm not an expert on this, and I haven't researched this or not. I think that for the first time on two occasions, what Gadir talked about, installing the cameras in the polling booths throughout Israel, something that he failed to do, but I'm not sure Netanyahu even wanted to succeed.
Activists of Likud party tried to put cameras in voting polls in Arab towns and cities to show that they are cheating.
To intimidate, and what Gadir said earlier, to decrease the voter turnout. So that and the nationality law, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon, those two subjects, those two topics, there was a media pushback. And not just particularly from the Druze community, but also from the Arab community.
So this may be, Amir, the turning point. And I want you to look at both societies, the Israeli and the American, which are both very polarized around very seed values, so to say, right? So can you elaborate, give us a perspective from here to Israel and back?
So, good morning, Boker Tov. I think there is a lot of similarity, definitely, between trends that are happening in Israel and trends that are happening here in Washington, D.C. And a lot of it actually has to do with the issues that Radir and Alon described so wisely, the connection between the media and politics. One example recently here in the United States is if you look at public opinion regarding Trump on a whole host of issues, whether it's the impeachment trial, it hasn't begun yet, but could be the inquiry, or whether it's in generally his policy. And you can clearly see that within the Republican electorate, that the people who respond to polls who identify as Republicans, there is a gap of how Trump is perceived between people who say that their main source of news is Fox News and people who say that they have other main sources of news. And it's not only about being Republican or Democrat. And by the way, this has not been polled at the same level, but I'm pretty convinced that if you asked Democrats, people who identify as Democrats, who say their main source of news is MSNBC and specific programs on that network, there will also be a gap in how they perceive some of the issues in the news versus somebody who would say, I'm a Democrat and my main source of news is the New York Times or the Washington Post or a local newspaper or a local TV station. And cable news here, I have to watch it for my job. I don't recommend to anyone in your free time. I think there are much better sources. There are amazing,
unless you go to detox,
no, I think
detox
there
later.
are amazing newspapers in this country and great, radio programs and some very good TV programs. Not a big fan of the cable TV, endless breaking news cycles. And I think in Israel we are seeing to some degree the same effect taking place. People are creating their own echo chambers. And there is a meeting point between the social media that Radir talked about and the controlled public media that Alon talked about, the TV channels and newspapers and news websites that are becoming controlled by politicians or by owners with interests that are trying to serve the politicians. The junction between that kind of media and the social media can create an echo chamber where you really have people that have a totally different view of reality than others. At the same time, I do have to say, I think that in discussions like the one we're having today, both about the United States and about Israel, there is sometimes an exaggeration of how much influence both the social media and the general media do have on people. I think before the midterm elections here, which happened last year, I was having conversations with friends here in Washington and other parts of the country who were telling me, but look what is happening. Trump has Fox News, and he has his Twitter feed, and he's going to get all these Republicans out to the polls, and there's nothing the Democrats can do. And in some states, that turned out to be true. But in many states and congressional districts, it didn't. And there were Democratic candidates who won all over this country.
Who had MSNBC and Hillary Clinton's Twitter account.
Some of them did, but I think many of them had just really hard work of meeting voters face to face and actually operating outside of the media of the breaking news cycles. And also in Israel, I think that with everything that Netanyahu did in the last election, and his activity on social media in the last election was way beyond that of all the other politicians. In the last days before the election, he was basically living on Facebook. He was doing a Facebook live broadcast that started every day in the morning and went up until the middle of the night. And at the same time, he really did increase his control and influence of the mainstream media in Israel, and he has more and more influence on television channels and news websites, and some of and of course there is Israel Hayom, but also Haronot has changed his coverage. A lot of that is happening, and with all of that kind of hammer that he kept banging, his party only lost votes, and the people that he singled as his rivals in this election, Benny Gantz, the head of Radir's party, Avigdor Lieberman, which Netanyahu basically hounded the entire election for being a leftist, they only got more seats. They both had a successful election, more votes, not more seats, excuse me. They both had more votes. And also the Arab Joint List, which Netanyahu basically described as a terror-supporting entity and went after very viciously. And he did everything that Radir talked about in order to decrease the Arab vote. Actually, the Arab vote went up, and that party grew by 3 seats. So I think that it's important to be aware of the processes that we're discussing here, how the politicians are using the social media to create echo chambers, and how once you have both the social media and some control of the mainstream media, you can create a bubble for your own supporters. But we also need to remember that there are limitations to the reach of that bubble, and that we should not all just fall into some kind of a depression and say there's nothing we can do about it.
No, of course. Here we are doing, and we should continue doing that. We will prevail.
Maybe.
We should have a vision. Radir, maybe the nation-state law was the turning point, and I want to ask you whether this was a personal turning point for you to join politics. I mean, this was a really created a huge cleavage within the Israeli society, whether this should be introduced at all, and what's the use of it apart from dividing two societies, the Jewish society, which became superior to the other citizens of Israel, Muslim, Druze, and Christians. And it created a lot of protest in the streets. And the Druze community were the first to go out and speak about it very powerfully.
I think that we have to
Just
understand.
I'll let you know, sorry, the Jewish community in Israel is about 140,000 people. It's a small community.
Yes. In order to understand how we got the nation-state law, which was the symptom, I think, we need to look in a macro perspective. Israel is heading toward a scary future, is heading in the wrong direction of being an illiberal democracy, a democracy in which the judiciary system and the rule of law is a meaningless rubber stamp, a system in which the government could act in any way it wants to act without any checks and balances. With no rigid laws that protect minorities and equality. And this is, history taught us that with that happen, nothing could stop the tyranny of majority. And Israel is a garrison state. It is a militaristic society in which security is the most important issue. Huge amounts of even the highest...
State security, not personal security.
Yes. And
distinction is important.
Yes, a huge amount of the budgets goes to army in order to maintain the capability, the military capability and the supremacy in the Middle East. And people understand always that there is an enemy. One day it could be Hamas, the other day Hezbollah or Iran regime. And the fact that there are always fear, it requires the leaders to spread fear always, that there's always enemy that want to destroy us, and it's very sensitive to the Jewish people who knows what is Holocaust. And all the optimism that we had in the 19th, it was replaced by pessimism, by fear after the terror attacks, and it caused Israel to shift to the right. And today we can say, even when we look to the foreign policy, Israel is much closer to the Eastern European club. We can see even we can connect it to the rise of Trump, to the Brexit, to the nationalist parties in France, Italy, or even Germany, to the nationalist governments in Poland, in Hungary. And we are connected more and more to countries that feel that democracy doesn't benefit them anymore, that prefer nationalist ideas or values than democratic values. And I don't know if it is good for Israel. It's not good for Israel's image to belong to this club. And the fact that the nation-state law came, I think that this was the symptom of a global phenomena of preferring nationalist ideas than the democratic ideas. And we got this law that the Knesset passed last summer. And it was, I belong to the Jewish community. We are the most loyal minority in Israel. We serve in army in the highest percentage, which is 82%. It is even higher than the one in the Jewish community. And what we got? We felt that it was like a stab in the back. We felt that the country betraying us. We felt that we proved our loyalty to the country, and now it is the turn of the country to prove its loyalty to us. And the supporters of the law said that the purpose is to ensure that Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people. And this is, we know that it's not true, They said that this is a symbolic law with no any practical implication. Benjamin Netanyahu said that this is an answer for being attacked by NGOs, by BDS, by the left, by Arab minority, and that the equality is determined by other basic laws like human dignity and liberty. And the most dangerous thing was when I heard, Alon, as you said, be grateful of being born in Israel. As a minority, you could be born in Syria and be killed. Look what is happening there. Excuse me? It was so hard for me. When I covered as an anchor woman from Kikar Rabin, the rally, in August, I covered and I almost cried. I felt
This was the big demonstration of the Druze in Rabin Square in Tel Aviv against the nation state law.
Yes, there was 100,000 people in Kikar Rabin. And we said equality. This is what we need, equality. This is a basic need for any democracy. And this is the purpose. That's why I'm here.
You know that equality is not part of the Israeli law.
Yeah, it was in the Israel Declaration of Independence, which this is what I want to fix. Israel as a nation must provide equal civil rights to all its citizens, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. And this is what I want to do. At the first clause, to add the word equality, because I said I have no problem with what was written in the law. I don't have problem with the flag nor with the anthem Hatikva. I am loyal to this country. I belong to this country. I am an integral part of this country. I am protecting this country. In the fourth clause, they decided to demote my mother tongue language, Arabic, to a special status. By the way, nobody could explain what is a special status. It should be a formal, an official language, the Arabic, alongside Hebrew, because Arabic as a language, it doesn't risk Hebrew, which is keep going and developing itself. And in the seventh clause, it was written that the nation or the states will promote the settlements, the Jewish settlements. And I can tell you, I live in Dalat al-Karmel. In my village, we are suffering from a shortage of land. The comprehensive urban plans were not extended for decades. So, okay, no problem. You can work and develop settlements. Okay, there is limitation. But you need also to solve my problem. You need to develop infrastructure and building for the whole citizens. And you know, this is basic need, equality.
Thank you. Alon, yeah. It's amazing to think that equality, which is essential value in democracy, doesn't exist in the Israeli basic laws, which is eventually will make our constitution. We don't have a constitution. So, Alon, you were part of the Israeli delegation to the Israeli-Syrian talks and the Israeli-Palestinian talks.
The very successful ones, yes.
Exactly. This was my question. I mean, not the fail in the talks, but how far are we? I mean, 20 years have passed, right? And it seems like, you know, a generation of nothingness. And I mean, can you give us some hope in terms of?
You know, I have to tell you, Anat, I rarely, if ever, find myself as the optimist in the panel. But after listening to my good friend Adir, I have to sprinkle a little bit of optimism here, okay? In terms of the peace process, because that's what you answered, but that's what you asked. Okay, look, there's no peace process. It's not because the public shifted rightward. I happen to be a heretic on this, and I think public opinion has not shifted to the right. What it has, it's been disillusioned with the peace process. And because there wasn't a price to be paid, because there was no, thankfully, there was no terrorism, and there was no international pressure, at least since 2014, when John Kerry basically moved to Israel and worked from there, or Israel and the Palestinian territories. So there is a willingness in Israel to entertain peace if that peace is packaged and formatted in a different way. With the Syrians, it's a no-go. It's a no-starter for the foreseeable future. Nothing to do with Donald Trump's declaration that he recognizes Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights. That means nothing from an international legal point of view. But in terms of the Palestinian issue, we have a problem, because more of the same won't work. Assuming that you can start the Oslo process from where it stopped has to go back 15 years to actually detect that point where it ceased to exist. There hasn't been a peace process for the better part of the 10 years, of the last decade, and that decade has been all under Mr. Netanyahu. And everything that Adir and you described about Israeli democracy, the state law, this is all Netanyahu Mr. Netanyahu taking advantage of the absence of a peace process, the aura that people don't care about a peace process, the fact that there's no pressure coming from the Palestinians, and one little problem that he promises to take care of for an entire decade, but never does, called Gaza.
And let me add one more component. I think there isn't even one member of Knesset who holds this flag now. Tzipi Livni was the last one to hold the flag of the pro-negotiation, pro-peace process.
You're absolutely right. If you look at the two election campaigns in April and in September, no one used a peace process. But forget peace process. That's a wonderful, sexy term that no longer exists. A diplomatic process. A negotiation process. No one, neither Blue, White, nor Labor, Meretz made some scantily heard noises about a peace process, but that's a left-wing marginal party in terms of the national debate. No one used it, and if we have election again in March, no one's going to use that, or February or March, no one is going to use that again. What is now? You asked me about specifically about the future of this. Look, there are two problems right now that prevent any kind of negotiation. One is called Benjamin Netanyahu, and the other is called Mahmoud Abbas. Okay, any way you look at it. And I know there are left-wingers in Israel who say Abbas is a great partner. Okay, he's not. And there are people outside who say, well, Netanyahu, you know. By the way, 4 American administrations thought they can work with Netanyahu, and he fooled them all the time. And that includes Obama, and that includes Donald Trump. There is no a deal of the century plan. It's nonsense. It doesn't exist. It's a cut and paste of ideas that won't work.
Netanyahu is meeting Kushner today, no?
Ooh, okay, I stand corrected then. זהו, אין לי אותו. I'm done. He's meaning him. I don't want to say anything that would undermine.
As a prime minister in transition.
Anything I can. לא, זהו, גמרתי, באמת. באמת.
Amir, Haaretz newspaper is forcefully pushing forward this, you know, the conflict, or all the coverage of the conflict, as opposed to the other media in Israel, which completely ignores and make the majority of the people in Israel think that the occupation is over, and we no longer have to deal with that. I mean, how challenging is that for you, you know, to push that topic into the public opinion in Israel, or the target audience in Israel, or are you writing to another target audience here in English?
So it's true that Haaretz writes about these issues more than other newspapers, and I think, honestly, it's not only the issue of the occupation or the peace process or security challenges in the West Bank that Haaretz covers more than other newspapers. I would say the same about corruption of all sorts, by the way. It doesn't matter if it's from the right, the left, the center, up and down, and also from other parts of the media and, you know, institutions of the state. And I think there is a connection between the fact that our newspaper will cover, in my opinion, more seriously the things that are happening in the West Bank and the occupation, and also these issues. I think it's more about the fact that just Haaretz is the only daily broadsheet newspaper that is left in Israel that has, you know, a large swath of paper. And if you look daily at the front pages of the newspapers in Israel, usually if you look at the front page of some of our competitors, there are maybe 3 or 4 or tops 5 stories on the front page. One big headline with colors and big pictures, and then 4 little boxes that have 4 words each. If you look at the front page of Haaretz, on many days you will have 8 or 9 different stories on the front page, and each one will be represented by at least a paragraph. And that gives you the ability to write. And of course, there is also an ideological issue here, that Haaretz has taken the role of trying to be somewhat of a paper of record and putting stories into the record, even ones that are not the most popular, not generating the most attention. From my point of view, being the reporter for the newspaper here in Washington, The issues that Alon described about the lack of a real diplomatic process has been somewhat frustrating because the Israeli media does give some coverage to the adventures of Jared Kushner in the Middle East and the notion that there is some secret game-changing American peace plan that will be revealed, and every time I get questions about it, and I remain very skeptical, I have to say.
Do you think there is a deal of the century?
When I started working here in Washington, I basically started right with Trump. Actually, my first week on the job was Trump's inauguration. There was like this big black tie event Trump celebrated with all of his donors and big supporters. And you know, it was right around the inauguration, and Trump was really happy. And at some point, he was looking around the room. It was bigger than this room. He said, "Where's Jared? You know, bring Jared." And then Jared Kushner comes over, and Trump starts talking about how this, you know, this guy's brilliant and so smart. And at some point, Trump says, "If he can't make peace in the Middle East, nobody can." And I thought to myself, why doesn't my father-in-law speak about me in those terms? I mean, that's what you need to have in the family, you know, but believe in each other. So I remain skeptical. I think they did do a lot of meetings and they heard out all the leaders, but I don't see the political sense of it. Trump needs the evangelical vote to be very, very high in next year's election in order to be reelected. He's counting on those voters. The evangelical voters will not support a president that is in a conflict of any sort with Israel. And that means that the peace plan has to be totally accepted and totally you know, in agreement with Netanyahu. The problem with, as long as Netanyahu is prime minister at least. The problem with that, of course, is a peace plan that is totally accepted to Netanyahu. What is the chance that it's even being considered not only by the Palestinians, but also by Jordan and Egypt and other Arab countries? Okay, maybe you can get Saudi Arabia with enough money to support it, but what about everyone else? And that's why I would love to be surprised, and I would love to be wrong on this, and I would love to see a serious and, you know, well-thought American peace plan that will challenge Netanyahu and also challenge Abbas, because I totally agree with Alon's assessment that Abbas is also a very problematic actor at this point in his life. I give him credit for some things in the past and for not supporting violence and terrorism and standing up to Arafat during the Second Intifada, but at this point in his life, in 2019, I think he's a very problematic actor as well. And I think it will be very easy for him, by the way, if this peace plan ever comes out, which I agree with Alon, it might never happen. But if it ever comes out, I think it will be extremely easy for him to reject it. It won't be even a bit challenging. So that's why I don't have too high hopes, and I think Haaretz will continue to cover these issues because, unfortunately, there will not be any breakthrough to end them.
But I would assume that, I wish that people in the American administration are meeting with other players than Abbas. I mean, his successors or whatever.
I will try to answer, although there is some merit to the question that Alon asked. I think that they, you know, in the beginning, if we look at the trajectory of this deal of the next century.
Please.
In the beginning, it was Jason Greenblatt, Trump's personal lawyer, real estate specialist, who would come to the region, and he also met Abbas several times, and they had good meetings. And Abbas came here to Washington in May of 2017 and had a good meeting with Trump. But then, as the issue of the Jerusalem announcement began to take shape, and as the Palestinians were beginning to get more and more messages that this plan is basically going to be, you know, a green light for massive Israeli annexation of the West Bank, and they get some kind of a mini state, they and the Jordanians and others basically decided to, you know, to cut away from it. And if they are meeting any other Palestinians, well, I mean, it's not been really publicized, and I think they are. You know, I think their whole approach to this has basically been, yes, nobody's talking to us, and it's not really working on the Palestinian side, but just wait. When we publish it, the Palestinians would love it. Okay, we'll wait and see. As Trump likes to say, we'll see what happens, right? So. Well,
this is very childish, if I may comment, but I would assume, really, that diplomats or professionals at the State Department since America wants to be influential everywhere, they already, you know, I don't know, marked the successors of Mahmoud Abbas, and they do talk to them.
There is discussions about it, but I think the Palestinian arena right now is not seen here in Washington as such a big priority. I think that the State Department, the Pentagon is much more concerned about potential successors in place, or you know, I would say, God forbid, successors in countries like Jordan and Egypt and what's happening in Iraq. I mean, between everything that's happening in the region, the Israeli-Palestinian issue, from my opinion, as an Israeli, I think it's the most important issue that our country is facing. And I was very disappointed to see what Radir and Alon said, that this was not an issue in the election. I really think it's the #1 issue. But being here in Washington, I must say honestly, for America, I don't think it should be a priority. I don't think it's such an important issue in the Middle East today, between everything that's happening in Syria. It's our problem. And it would be wonderful to have American help in solving it. I mean, sometimes the American help actually doesn't help so much. But it would be wonderful to get help from anyone who can to help solve it. But it's really, really our problem. It's a problem of Israel.
The American jury is stakeholders of this problem as well.
I agree, but I think the Pentagon, unlike what you read in the Daily Stormer, the Pentagon and the State Department are not controlled by American Jewry. And I think for American Jews, it's extremely important to also to be involved in this. And I totally encourage people who care about Israel, who consider themselves Zionists, who are worried for Israel, to be involved and active on the Israel-Palestinian issue. Don't understand me to say this is not important. For Israel, in my opinion, it's the #1 issue. But to be honest, here in America, for the Pentagon, for the State Department, they have bigger problems right now. And they're basically, I think, saying, if Bibi and Abbas want to continue to act like little children and not do anything to work, so that's their problem. We have other issues to deal with.
Thank you. I think it's time for Q&A, Yael. So you can line up behind this microphone at the center of the room. And if you can please say who you are and where you're from.
David DeGroot from Charlotte, North Carolina, despite what you might think. My question is about the nation-state law and its impact. So what I saw in the media at the time, as well as the mass demonstration, was most of the focus was on, or if not all the focus, was on how unfair it was to the Druze minority. And because, as Gadir said, they serve in the army, they're loyal to the state, etc. I saw very little, if any, feedback or opposition in the media to how it affected the vast majority of the 20% Arab minority. And that didn't come up in this discussion either. It was all about the Druze, but no one's talking about how it affected Muslims, you know, the vast majority of whom vote for the joint list. I was wondering why that is not part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for this. Shall we take 2, 3 questions and then, okay.
Hi, Adam Chekhov from Arlington, Virginia. I'm just curious about like media coverage of economic issues in Israel during the last election, since, I mean, I know that traditionally elections and politics have sort of been divided and decided along lines of like issues of security rather than economics, but like based on what I'm seeing, you're seeing like a rising levels of economic inequality and poverty in Israel, especially in large part because you're seeing so many resources being diverted to construction of settlements as opposed to investment within the Green Line. Yet, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the economy didn't really get that much coverage during the last Israeli election. Most of it was on like, you know, sort of like on Netanyahu himself. So with, I guess like if like Netanyahu, for instance, like is able to, if we're able to get rid of him in these coalition talks, like could like economic issues become more prevalent in the discussion of, within the Israeli media, and could that change some of the like political calculations, given that you're seeing like a lot of people who would, you know, benefit from more left-wing economic policies in Israel, especially in the working class, vote for more right-wing parties. So.
Hello, I'm Susan Sklar from Providence, Rhode Island. So I want to just ask Amir, I just want you to explain why it is your problem, just in more depth, like why you see that as the #1 problem. Because I think for a lot of people here who are Americans, American Jews, we see it as our number one problem as Jews supporting Israel. It's not America's, obviously it's not America's number one problem, but I don't think it's just your problem, but I'd like to hear also what you explain that a little bit more.
I agree with you. It's also a big problem for American Jews who care about Israel. That's what I said. I was talking that there's a differentiation between that and the Pentagon, State Department, etc., who are institutions of America, not American Jewry. That's the distinction.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you for being here. Joel Gersten from the Bay Area, California. Simple question. What do you think are the major challenges and the probabilities of Benny Gantz forming a coalition successfully? And if
Simple question.
Yeah, simple. Should only take 2 minutes. And if he can't, what is the forecast for changing this cycle in Israel of inability for society to create some kind of political consensus and move forward?
Okay.
He just asked my question.
Okay, thank you. So I suggest that we start with the. You want to? Okay, Aviva.
Aviva Meyer. I am on the board of Americans for Peace Now, and at the moment I'm acting as the executive director of Americans for Peace Now. I'm really provoked by I guess it was the last question, because I would very much appreciate if 3 of you, and maybe all of you, would talk about maybe 3 things that you can think of that would make a difference in changing the reality in Israel. I've got 3 in my mind. I'm not going to tell you, but I hope that you can add so that when I talk to people, as I obviously have to all the time, I can expand on what things. So you can do that at the end, because that takes a little
This will
thought.
be the end, and this will give us the vision. Okay, I suggest that we start with the nation-state law and the share of the Arab minority in Israel in that law, because this affects them dramatically, and the Druze tried to exclude themselves from the rest of the Arab minority, and I know that among the Muslims there was an unease because there was a huge demonstration in favor of the Druze who do serve in the army and they are loyal to the state, as opposed to the other Arab minority in Israel who are like 1.5 million people, 20% of the population, and they don't serve in the army, and so they are considered even lower in the ladder of citizenship. Okay.
It's very complicated. When I introduce myself, I always say I am an Israeli citizen, but I am not Jews. I am an Arab, but I am not Muslim. I am in the middle. Arab look at you as a betrayer because you are so pro-Israeli, we are loyal, we serve in IDF, and on the other hand, a part of the Jewish people look at you as an Arab. So it's very complicated. The government separated us from the foundation of the country, and our relation with the Jewish people started even before the establishment of the state. We actually felt that there is a similarity of the political vision between Druze and Jews. And the mandatory conscription law was applied to Druze in 1956. And today we are very well integrated in all aspects.
The question is whether you should embrace this trend of the government to separate you from the rest of the Arab because it serves your own interest, or you should use your power or the power that you gain to benefit all the Arabs.
As I said, it's very complicated. The fact that we serve in army, it put you in a position where you are already separate yourself. And although we share the same language, Arabic, we have the same culture, we have lots of common things together, all the traditional, our life is so similar to the Arab life. But the political vision is so different. We don't have any territorial aspiration or any national aspiration. We do not believe that one day we will have our own state, a Druze state. That's why these are huge differences when we come to define ourselves or to understand the differences between Druze and Arab.
So let me ask you a tough question. Would you be satisfied if the law is corrected in a way that it will include the Druze but leave the rest of the Arabs outside?
No. I want to achieve equality for all Israeli citizens. I think that this is a basic and important need in any democracy. I already submitted a amendment to the nation-state law in the Knesset, and I don't want a separate law for us as a Druze, because it's a problematic situation. We are talking about racism. How can I look to my children in their eyes and tell them that I was also there and I helped to divide the citizens and to separate them and to categorize the citizen? This is what the law does for us. It separated us to A class and B class, to Jews and non-Jews. So I must achieve equality for all Israeli citizens. This is the basic need in any democracy.
Because this was not the climate among some of the Druze leaders. You know, they felt very comfortable, embraced by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And
I don't agree with that. I think that this is wrong for our image as a Druze, as a community. It's wrong for the future, for our position in Israel as a minority. We must understand that Israel is a heterogeneous culture and a heterogeneous society, and we must understand that it is a power. We can use it in a way that it will enriches us, enriches the way that we can deal with the problem. And it's Benny Gantz, the leader of my party, Blue and White Party, called before we were united to be a Blue and White Party. It was Hosn Israel, or the resilience of Israel, because he said that our resilience as a society is the base for all the other resilience, the military one, the financial one, and now we are not there yet. We are so divided.
Can I have one sentence about from a media perspective? I agree with everything Radir said, that the equality before the law should be for everyone. That it's not even a question, and I think I just totally agree. From a public relations media perspective, I do have to say that I think it made a lot of sense that the Druze fight against this law was at the top of the headlines, because this was an issue that I think if you just look at public opinion polls, touched on so many people. And I think it's also here in America, if we look historically, if we want to be honest about how progress was made about a lot of civil rights issues, many times it came with questions that had to do with military service. And with people, and
well, that's a problem. The question is whether we should push back to that discourse or embrace it, you know, and the media embraced it.
I agree. That's a discussion to have, but I'm saying from a real politic kind of point of view, that's just a lot of times how progress is made in societies where you need to change problems of racism and discrimination. And if you look at the history here in the United States as well, a lot of times there were these, stories that did break the headlines, that did change people's mind and perspective. Because at the end of the day, this is about changing people's minds. This is about causing people who think that it's okay to discriminate to realize that it's really not. And a lot of times that progress is made when you have someone who's standing on the front line and says, I served this country, I put my body on the line, I risked my life, I lost my friends, and now you're discriminating against me. And that a lot of times opens the door for others to then come in. And I think one way to look at what happened with the nation-state law is actually to say, the Druze tried to single themselves out and it's wrong. And I think another way to look is maybe to say the Druze basically stood on the doorstep and emphasized everything that their community has been through. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the localities in Israel with the highest percentage of people who have died serving the country are Druze villages. I think Khorfesh is number one, right?
I think Khorfesh is number one. It's very important what you're saying, Amir, because lots of people thought that the path to full integration would be by serving in army. And today when we understand that this is wrong, we are very well integrated in all the fields, and they called us Achim Shelanu, or our brothers. We are your brothers because we are citizens, and we must be treated in an equal way. It doesn't matter what about IDF. It doesn't matter, okay? So it's a very important issue to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that in many ways you can say the Druze are opening the door here, or at least not letting Netanyahu shut it down and insist to put their foot in the door. But it's an ongoing conversation.
Okay, any of you want to comment about the economic issue? But by the way, the economic issue was broadly covered during the last two election campaigns, and I don't think it's a
I said one short sentence. I think one of the issues, I do think in previous elections, there was more of an economic focus. At least there were parties that ran solely on economic issues. In 2015, the party of Moshe Kahlon became finance minister. Yair Lapid in 2013 made a big deal out of it. And this time there was one party, Labour, with Amir Peretz and Orly Levy, that put an emphasis on this. But I think it was not the #1 issue, and I think it is important, but at the end of the day, an election really can be about 2-3 issues, and this time I think it was mostly about Netanyahu, the rule of law, and to some degree religion and state, which was once Lieberman, exploded that bomb, you couldn't shut it down.
Alon?
No.
Okay. So let me go to Aviva's question. And Alon, I'll start with you. Can you point 3 things that may change the Israeli reality?
Yeah. Just 3. Just 3. Like importing 5 million Swedes and replacing the Palestinians with Swedes. You never thought of that. Okay. Look, Israel is a process in the making. Okay, this is a very unique country in terms of how it evolved. It's a democracy without any democratic roots or backgrounds. Adil said correctly that Israel is turning into an illiberal democracy, but the fact is we were never a liberal democracy. The founders of the State of Israel came from patently undemocratic backgrounds. Tsarist Russia and Poland and Romania, and then they brought their brethren from Morocco and Algeria and Yemen and Iraq. None of these societies was democratic. Okay? In fact, the only liberal Jews in the Austro-Hungarian Empire were assimilationists or moved to America. Okay? Yes, it was Herzl who founded political Zionism, but the people who essentially built our country were not Democrats. The idea that we will become a democracy, and this is the key to your question, I think. The idea that we are a democracy was a combination of Talmudic backgrounds, the old silly jokes about 2 Jews, 3 opinions, 2 synagogues, one I'll never set foot in, and all those jokes because of the DNA, the Jewish intellectual DNA that is argumentative and does not subject itself easily to authority. But that was you don't build a country based on that, on Talmudic background. And it was just an arrangement. But by the way, what the British left us was an excellent legal system and an excellent bureaucracy, but they didn't. It's not as if they left us with a democratic tradition. This was a short period of time. So when you say replace 3 things, it's impossible to. Okay, let me be blunt about this. And there's one thing that has to be replaced, and that's a prerequisite. And that thing has a name, and it's called Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay? Now, wait. Okay, because he's not a prime minister I dislike or disagree with. He's had a stranglehold on Israel for the last for the last decade. And not to use, expletives, or maybe later, but he's set Israel back in terms of the supremacy of the law, the independence of the judiciary, the political system, the media, which is where we began this discussion. So any intelligent answer to your question about what needs to change has to begin with him. It's not fixable overnight, but it needs to start somewhere.
Okay, we have 5 minutes, so be short.
Okay, so 3 things. At first, democracy. Israel could be a Jewish and a democratic state at the same way. I believe in that. And when I'm talking about democracy, democracy is not just the rule of the people. It is the rule of the law. And we must understand that this is very important issue, especially because of the fact that we have unicameral parliament. It means when we have extreme right government, it could be very dangerous for us. The second thing is social resilience. As I said, we are so divided and separated, and to left and right, to Arab and Jews, to Mizrahi, Ashkenazi people, and this is a very dangerous situation for us. So we must be united. We must stop the rhetoric of we and them to all of us as Israeli citizens, and then we can thrive and succeed as a state in all the other fields. And the third thing is that I hope that we will form the government, the blue and white, and we need brave leaders to make tough decisions in order to go out, because right now it's look like a standstill. Nothing is happening, no direct negotiations, and just this is the way for solving this conflict.
Thank you. Amir?
I agree with Radir. I will, my biggest dream, honestly, and this will get everyone angry at me, is, to have everyone in this room make aliyah and add some voters to the voting roll. But absent of that, I think, and I really like Aviva's question, because I think it's a question about doing something and being active and positive, and I think we need more of that in general. And you can take it in many directions, but it's just better to try to do than to only complain and get depressed about it. I will say, again, and this is a very personal opinion, because anyone can offer their priorities. When I looked at my country, Israel, at my society, and I try to think, 3 things that I would start, first of all, with relations between Jews and Arabs in Israel, and also Israelis, Jewish or not Jewish, and Palestinians. On the human level, on the people-to-people level, I think that is really missing. And so much of the hostility and the suspicion and the disbelief in any prospect of a better future starts from that, from a lack of contact between people and identification and understanding. I think that is one big priority. I also think there are really interesting things happening in Israel in the field of religion and state, a lot of them on the local level. And the reform and conservative movements, the non-Orthodox Jewish movements, are growing in Israel and are getting more support, and more people are identifying with them. And I think that is another trend that can be encouraged and can have a positive impact in Israeli society. I think the distinction between secular and religious in Israel is not as clear-cut as it used to be, and there is a space for other ideas to emerge and for a different kind of Judaism to become more popular in Israel and to offer an alternative to the mainstream Orthodox view, which unfortunately in Israel has taken a very nationalistic right-wing stand. And then another thing you can do is read Haaretz, but that's, I'm not going to go into that because there is a conflict of interest here. But think about the first idea I mentioned also,
Okay.
the first one about the Aliyah, but that's it.
I'll add my 3 points and the occupation. Shared society with the Arabs, I think this is a key for our resilience as a society. This is the only key for our future in Israel. And the separation between the state and the religious institutions. I mean, you don't know how much it influences our lives in Israel. You live in America and there is a separation. But in Israel, especially in the gender issue, we are subject to so many discrimination because of the rule of the religious institution in Israel. So I think this would be very high on my priority list. So I think we've come to an end. I'm sorry, we cannot take any more questions. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank Alon Pinkas, Radir Kamal, and Amir Tibon, and you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Yael.